On today's how-to adventure, we're doing front brake pads on my DRZ400S. If this is a job you want to do, then stay tuned. I'm going to show you how to do it and what you're going to need to do the job. Also, if you liked the video, please like and subscribe and leave me a comment. Let me know what you liked and what you didn't like. Okay, let's get started. First thing I want to go over is what you're going to need to do this job. I have just about everything laid out here on my bench. We could add some things along the way, but I think I've covered the bases here. Let me show you what we got. So first off, we are going to need some new brake pads. I have a new pad pin here because mine's the original to the bike. Some shop towels and rags, some DOT4 brake fluid, some brake parts cleaner. I have a little syringe for sucking fluid out of the reservoir. I have a nylon bristled brush. I have a torque wrench. I have a ratchet. I have a number 12 socket. I have a number 5 Allen. I have a flathead screwdriver. I have a Phillips head screwdriver. I have a seat clamp, which you may or may not need. I generally find you can compress the pistons back in the calipers by hand on these motorcycles. I also have laid out here blue thread locker. I use blue thread locker for the caliper bolts. The manual doesn't say they need it, but I put it on anyway for peace of mind. And those are the things that you will need, and when we come back, we'll go over the system and whether or not you need to replace your pads. Okay, let's discuss when to replace your pads. First, let's discuss where. Where's the actual amount of friction material that's left? There's actually a minimum thickness specification for that. On the front pads of the Suzuki DRZ, it's 40 thousandths of an inch or 1 millimeter. Also, some pads will have wear grooves in the friction material, like the factory OEM pads. If those grooves are worn away, it's time to replace the pads. Also, you could have uneven wear in the pad. A pad should wear evenly across its surface. If one end's thicker than the other, that could be indicative of a stuck slide pin, a stuck piston, or a worn out pad pin. You could also have defects in materials. You could have chunks missing out of the pads. You could have cracks in the pads. Also, you could have heat glazing on the pads. Glazed pads will have a mirror shiny-like finish and can have a blue haze to them. Also, you could get contamination on the pad friction material. You could get contamination from brake fluid from a leaky caliper piston. You could get fork oil from a leaky fork seal. So those are the reasons to replace your pads. If you know of any other reasons to replace your pads, please leave them down in the comments. Now, before we get started, I want to go ahead and inspect the front brake system to see if there are any other issues that may need to be addressed. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, let's go ahead and inspect the brake system. We'll start at the top of the bike by the brake lever, and we'll look for any leaks or any problems with the system before we get started. So right here at the brake lever, you have your master cylinder and reservoir right there. So we want to look right down in there to see if there's any wetness, for any brake fluid that may be leaking out of there. Also, over here where the brake line connects to the master cylinder, you want to feel around that, make sure there's no brake fluid coming out of there. Also, you can get brake fluid that comes out from underneath the cap. And that's usually a sign of a deformed diaphragm, a damaged diaphragm, or maybe even a missing diaphragm. It can also be caused by a previous brake pad job where the caliper pistons were compressed in and there was too much fluid in the system and it overflowed underneath this cap. A good indication of that would be flaking paint around here because the brake fluid is corrosive. While we're up here, let's look at the sight glass here for the brake fluid. Let's see. So if yours looks brown like coffee, it's time to replace it. It's too old and has too much moisture in it. Brake fluid is hygroscopic and it attracts moisture, and That moisture is not compressible, so that'll lead to a nice spongy feel of the brakes. Also, the level, if you see the lower mark there, the level of the brake fluid should be between that lower mark and the very top of the sight glass. And as you can see, the bubble in the top of my sight glass, it's perfectly, it's at the perfect capacity. Also, back to the color of the brake fluid, it should be clear like that. That's what you're looking for. Let's move on to the brake line right here. You want to make sure that it's in good order. It's not kinked anywhere or cracked or old. Or it can be old, but it shouldn't be cracked. So let's go ahead and follow that down the fork to the front caliper. So we'll go around the bike. So what we'll do is we'll follow it down. All that's in good order. All that's in good order. Also, nothing leaking out of the fork seals. No oil anywhere down here from the fork seals. So let's follow it down here to another place where it could be leaking, right here where the hose connects to the caliper. Feel around that. I like to feel for any brake fluid. I like to feel the caliper for any brake fluid as well. What can happen is these piston seals can leak, and that can contaminate your pad friction material. So I want to feel for any leaks. While we're down here, we want to go ahead and inspect the rotor for any grooves in the rotor. Mine doesn't have any grooves. It's in pretty good condition. If you did have a lip or a groove in it, you would probably want to measure the thickness of the rotor. The thickness, the minimum thickness is stamped into these rotors. The factory rotor on this bike says minimum thickness of 3 millimeters, so you'd want to measure that if you have grooves. Also, this might be a good time if you're going to do the pads to look at the surface of the rotor and see if there's a bunch of brake pad material in there. You may need to clean that off with some Scotch-Brite. So, and lastly, the last of the inspection is you could actually come around here. I doubt you'll be able to see it on camera, but you can look down in there and see the thickness of the pads. So you can inspect the pads that way as well without taking them off, just to kind of get an idea how much thickness or how much life's left in them. So if you bring you back down here, now Suzuki has a really cool way you could quickly change your brake pads by just pulling this plug out right here, unscrewing it, and then there's a pad pin underneath there that you would pull out with a 5 millimeter Allen. Once that's removed, the pads will drop out the bottom. Then you can take new pads, slide them right back up in place, put your pad pin back through, and you're done. So, but we're not going to do that. We want to do a little bit more thorough inspection. We're going to actually remove the caliper from the bike and look it over very carefully before changing the pads on this bike. So when we get back, I'll go get my tools and we'll start that. Be right back. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do in changing these pads are we're going to remove this pad pin plug. So be very careful. Don't strip this. This is a flathead. These can be really tight, so if you're having trouble removing this, do not strip that head out. Instead of using a screwdriver, go get yourself a hand impact screwdriver like this to remove that. I've already checked mine. It's actually loose. So let me go ahead and remove that real quick. Set that aside. Now inside there is a 5 millimeter Allen head. We're going to go ahead and loosen. We're just going to loosen it while it's still attached to the forks. So all I did was just loosen it. Next we're going to remove the caliper from the forks. We're here with using a 12 millimeter socket. So let's break that one free and break that one free. Caliper's already getting loose and wants to come off. Okay, so the caliper should slide right off. We'll just pull it back. It should come right off the rotor, and there's let's set this over here and we'll get a good look at it. Alright, we'll have to pull, let's go ahead and pull the pad pin out the rest of the way now that it's removed from the bike. So we'll take number 5 Allen and finish pulling the pad pin out. It's tight. Okay, so this bottom pad is going to... So I got the pad pin out finally, and I went ahead and removed the final pad. As you can see, it's fairly dirty in here, and we're going to want to use our nylon brush to clean all this up. Now that we've had the brake pads removed, here are 2 pistons. And now it's very important at this stage that nobody squeezes the brake lever, or these pistons could pop out of their bore. And that's a whole nother problem. That's going to cause you to have to put everything back together and re-bleed your brakes. So don't touch your brake lever at this point in the process. So definitely going to replace the pad pin. It's very corroded. You could wire wheel this down smooth again, but I'm feeling some grooves in there with my fingernails, so that's going to cause the pads to end up hanging up and wearing unevenly. So we'll replace that. So I'm going to go ahead and clean this up, and I'll get back to you. Alright, the caliper is clean, and it's ready to be reassembled. I've went ahead and checked the slide pins here. As you can see it moving nicely. So that is actuating perfectly. If not, you can pull this out and grease these 2 pins and slide it back together. It just pulls apart. So we're almost ready to put the pads in. So what we got to do next is compress both of these pistons. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the old pads back in and pry a flathead screwdriver between the 2 of them and sink these pistons all the way back in. But before I do that, I've got to take a little bit of brake fluid out of my master cylinder reservoir up top. Because I have topped it off in the past, so I know if I compress those in, I'm going to have an overflow issue up top. So I'm going to remove just a little bit out of there, and I will be right back. Alright, the top is removed. I removed the 2 Allen head screws and removed the top and the diaphragm. I have my little syringe. I am just going to suck a little bit out of here. I'm not going to drain it. I am just going to suck a little bit out, about that much there. There's still plenty in there. You don't want to suck all the fluid out because you don't want to introduce air into the system. So we've removed enough where I can now compress the pads. So let's go do that next. I've got the pads reinstalled. My old pads, I'm going to take a flathead screwdriver and put between both pads, and I am going to pry inward, and we are going to, alright, that should about do it. Let's remove the old pads again. Take a look, and as you can see, the pistons are now completely recessed into their cavities. Alright, so now we can put new brake pads in. So, okay, it's time to put the pads in. Got my new pads. Of course, you don't want to get any grease or anything on that friction material right there. So this actually will slide in like that, and it will sit up against the front spring clip like that. And we'll take the other one, and it will also slide in the same way. This is kind of difficult to see, and that will sit in against the front spring clip as well. And what we'll do, the pads are now installed. The fronts are against the spring clip in the front. Now we're going to put the pad pin through to lock the rear end. So we may have to push the rear of the pads down a little bit to get them to get it to line up. And we'll go ahead and just get that hand tight in there. The new pad pin comes with Loctite. already pre-installed. So we'll just crank it down. Okay, that bottomed out. So I didn't torque it yet, so the pads are in place. Now I can slide it back onto the rotor. So let me move you guys around. Move you guys around over here. The pads are spread apart. There you have it. Now I just got to get my caliper bolts and put some blue thread locker in, tighten them down to 19 foot-pounds, and that caliper is reinstalled. So caliper's installed, torquing to 19 foot-pounds, the caliper bolts. Alright, and I did add blue thread locker to the threads of those before threading them in by hand. Okay, now I have to torque the pad pin. The pad pin is 13 foot-pounds, so let's go ahead and torque that. There it is. We'll put the pad pin plug back in, and this job is just about done. We just have to pump the front handbrake up top to re-engage the pads onto the rotor, and this job is done. Alright, so I need to pump the front brake lever and to set the pads onto the rotors. Okay, they're pumping up. Okay. Alright. So if you notice, if you look here into the sight glass, the level is a little, it's above the low mark, but not quite to the top of the sight glass. I probably could add just a teeny bit of brake fluid and my level will be perfect. Okay, so I'm going to add a little bit of brake fluid to my reservoir to bring it up, and that's it. This job is done. Okay, that's really all there is to it. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was fun making it. A lot of different angles to try to make the video, so I'd appreciate it. Like and subscribe to my channel. Also, leave me a comment on what you thought, what you would do different, what you liked, what you didn't like. And that's it for a brake pad removal and inspection and replacement on a DRZ400. Bye!